Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio, and I hope you enjoy my next tutorial.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio, and today we're going to cover more on animation, and specifically I'm going to show you how you can do animation with the transform property on objects. It's very interesting. It's not very complicated because I'm going to walk you through it and make it as simple as possible for you to understand. Okay, so let's get started. Here we have an application that I worked on in my previous tutorial where we went over chained events. And if you remember, if you worked on this tutorial with me, what we did is we faded in all these different elements one after another. So it was like they were chained together. And then I added more to it. So if you click this button, it goes to a second screen. As you can see, I'm on my storyboard in the back here. So this application really doesn't do anything right now. The idea is that you see different dishes and you can swipe it left or right to say you like it or you don't like it. And then if you see a dish that you like, you can share it with your friends. So you click this button down here, a menu expands, then you have different share options, social sharing. But, those buttons don't really do anything. This is the animation that we're going to cover. We're going to cover the expansion of this menu and having it rise up from the bottom and then having it show these buttons. Now, as you notice, there's a few different animations going on here. One, when I click this button, that dark circle is expanding outward to the sides. And then another thing is, as the menu goes up, this button is rotating. And then another animation are these buttons fading in. So the fading in of the buttons you should be familiar with because we did that on the previous tutorial where we faded in these items. And it looked really nice by the time we were done. And then we're just kind of like doing the reverse. When I click this button, we're kind of like unwinding all the animations, I guess you could say. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Let's get started. I built out a lot of this already, so we don't really have to cover it. Makes the video faster. But what we do need is just that we have to build out that bottom menu. So the bottom menu, of course, is just a UI view. So let's get that on there. And let me just set some sizes because I know what the sizes are ahead of time because I already built it. So it's 122 points high. And of course we had a button on the top, right? So let's add that button. The button is what we can click on to expand the menu. We'll just put it in the center there. And the button, it just has an image, an up image like that. So this is what we're going to click for it to go up, and then we're just going to rotate it so it points down. And behind that, if you look at this animation again, you see that darker circle? That's actually just a UI view with a corner radius to make it circular. So let's add that UI view there. And the UI view is going to be 44 by 44. That's kind of like, a standard button size. Human interface guidelines, they like to use 44 a lot because that's, I guess, the average finger size when you touch a device. So we're going to go with 44 by 44 because it's a good size for the finger. Now I'm going to just leave this one constraint set up here on the auto resizing because you see, like, if we use this on different devices, we want to keep that element in the center, and that's what's happening here. Same with our button. We'll just uncheck that one, and that'll keep it in the center and connected to the top inside the parent view. Okay, now this view we noticed was a darker color, right? So what I did for that is I started out with black, and then I just turned the opacity down so you could see through it. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was like around 50, somewhere around there. You can play with it to get it, on your app the way you like. And we're going to put that right up at the top here, like that. Okay, and the button is actually on top. So what I'm going to do is switch those around, like that. They're not quite lined up. So let me just grab that. Here's a little tip for you guys if you're working on the storyboard. Notice when I try to move this button around, it wants to go inside of that UI view. You see how the UI view turns blue? That's like an indicator that whatever element or control you're dragging around, when a container turns blue, that means it's going to go in that container. Well, I don't want it to go in that container. So if I hold down Command, that allows me to freely drag something around without it going into any container. So that's a little tip. It's very helpful. Okay, good. So they're both lined up. Now there's one other thing I'm going to do to this UI view that's underneath. Notice it was circular in our app, right? Nice round circle. I want to do that with this too. Now you notice in the past I've done that before using Interface Builder Designables and Interface Builder Inspectables. And what that allows you to do is it exposes properties right in this attributes inspector here that you can change to modify the control right on the storyboard. And that's what I'm going to use. If I go here, I already have some built in this resources folder here. Oops, let me scroll up here. I just called it UIView.X because I just didn't have a good name for it. So you'll see there's a bunch more properties here. And you've noticed in the past I've added these other ones for gradients and shadows and things in my previous videos. So that button is 44 by 44. So if you want to make it perfectly round, you have to divide that number in half. So it'll be 22. And then it gives you a nice little circle there. All right, good. We got all the elements in place. Now, one thing we have to do is add the buttons, but I'm going to add that later. Let's get this animation working first, where the menu is going up and going back down. So for it to go up, it has to go down first. So let's move this down. Right about there is good. And let's set some constraints. You don't really need to set constraints, but I'm going to show you like a little trick here. I like setting constraints on storyboards for this one reason right here. If I need to do some work on this view, I can just pull it up, do some work on it, and not worry about having it go back into place, because I can just click this button right here and it'll snap back in place where it's supposed to go. So this is handy because I'm going to be pulling this up and I'm going to be doing work by adding other buttons, or also, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the last step, is just adding those buttons and animating those. But it's just handy to be able to come down here, click this, and have it go back in place. So that's why I set constraints. If you use auto resizing, you can't do that. Like for example, if I have auto resizing here, right? But if I move it, I can't click a button to make it go back in place. I just have to kind of drag it back and hope it's in the right place. All right, good. So there's one last thing I have to do before we start implementing the animation, and that is to make this background a clear color. Okay, so that's looking like our demo application here, right? All right, so that's the first thing I'm going to do is when I click this button, I want this darker circle to expand and fill in the rest. You notice when I clicked on it, it stays circular and it just grows larger, right? So let's get that working first. I need to create some outlets. I'm on the wrong view controller here. There we go. So let's just grab them over here. We're definitely going to need an outlet for this menu, and we'll call it just that. We'll call it the menu view. Okay, and this is that round circular part, and I'll just kind of call that that's like the dark fill view. We have a button, and that's I'll call it the toggle menu button. Good, now we got our outlets. Now I'm going to, we need a action for this button here. And the button just toggles the menu up and down. So I'm just going to call it toggle menu. And it's an action. Okay, good. So now we have to program that dark circle expanding and filling up the menu view. This dark fill filling up the menu view up here. So what we want to do is we want to be able to toggle it. So when we click it, it expands that dark view, that dark fill, and when we click it again, it moves it back to the size that it was before. So well, first of all, let me just show you the expanding animation. So of course, if you guys have watched my videos, you know now what the first words that you need to use, right? UIView.animate. I had you say it 10 times in a previous video just so you can memorize it because you use it in everything. Let's see, animate. Here we go. And let's just start with the, let's see, which one am I going to need? I'm going to need this one right here. Because you notice there's many views, right? So I'm going to be chaining some views together like we learned in the previous video. So I need this completion handler right here to start my next animation after I finish this one. So let's use that. And for the time that it takes to fill it up, let's say it's 1 second. We can always adjust that, make it shorter or longer. And what I want to do is I want to take that dark fill view right here, and I want to make it larger. Now there's a few ways I can do this, right? I could put constraints on it, and I could adjust its frame and move it out and make it bigger. But you know what'll happen though is if I start to do that, well, just watching the storyboard, if I try to simulate that animation, like say I grab this, oh, let me select the right one here. Say I grab this and I start to expand it. You notice the corners radius, it doesn't move with it. And so it'd be kind of complicated if I had to do all that. If I had to keep changing the corner radius as I animate it, as it gets bigger and bigger. There's an easier way, and it's called doing a transform. And transforms allow you to take an object and basically manipulate its size or its position or rotate it. You know, it's very, very handy to learn these transforms. And the transform property is right on the object itself. So if I say self.darkFillView.transform, this is where I'm going to be setting it, right on this property right here. So basically what happens is you create a CGAffineTransform, and that's I keep having to learn how to say affine. So I had to look up how to say that word affine, because I had someone correct me in a previous video, and I didn't realize I was saying it wrong, and so I had to look it up in the dictionary and hit the little speaker icon so I could hear like how it's actually pronounced. So it's affine, like a fine day. And affine, basically all that means is it preserves parallel relationships. So it doesn't skew or warp objects. It just makes them bigger while maintaining the same size, or it rotates them while maintaining the same size. Or, rotate, or you can readjust the position. And all these different actions do not warp the object, do not skew the object. So that's basically what affine means, is it maintains parallel relationships of your object. There's more to it than that, but that's pretty much the simplest definition I can give you. And what we'll do is we need to create a new affine transform. Where are my options here? Here we go. So you can see you can rotate it, you can scale it, just make it bigger, smaller, or you can give it a translation, which gives it a different position from where you're starting from. So you can make it go a little higher up, lower, to the right, to the left, using a translation. What we need is scale, because we want to make it bigger. And the way the scale works is, let me just give you an example here. So if I use 1, 1 as my scale X and scale Y, actually, let's go full view just so we have more space here. So if I leave it as 1 to 1, that's not going to change. We want to make it bigger. So if we make it like 11, I think 11 is what I need. That makes it 11 times bigger. And that's what I'll need to fill up that whole view, is I need to make it 11 times bigger. So think of it as like 1x. So 1x, it's going to maintain the same size. So we want to make it 11 times bigger. Let's just put 11 in there. And for the completion, let's just let's not put anything in there for now. All right, good. Let's test that. Well, I should shorten up this animation so it animates faster. I can just click this button. Okay, good. So here's our button. Oh, we should change the color of that button too. All right, perfect. So this is exactly what we want. Notice that it expands gradually to its destination. But there's a couple things wrong. It's going outside of our view. So the way to fix that is if we just come here, go into storyboard. Okay, so for this menu right here, we don't want the views to go outside of it. So what we can do is we can use the clip to bounds, and that will not show anything outside of the bounds of the parent view. So these child views, when they expand outside of the bounds, will be clipped, which just basically means they won't be shown. What was the other thing we had to change? Oh yeah, the button color. Now, this button that I have here, when I added it to the project, right here, I set this property here called render as template image. And if you've seen my other videos, I use this a lot. If I set almost all my icons to template image, because that allows me to change the color of it without having to create new icons. And you change the color using the tint property. So you saw that it was blue. Well, here you see it's gray, right? So because it's rendered as a template, it'll use the tint color, which we saw was blue. We just want to make that white. There we go. All right, let's take a look at it. I gotta speed this up. Good, okay, it's white, and when I click it, it expands outward and stays within the bounds of that menu. The bounds of the menu view. Okay, let's go to the view controller real quick. I'm just going to change some of these numbers to make the animation go really fast. Just make it like a 0.1 duration on these. If you haven't seen the video where I build this out and teach you how to do chain animations, I'll include the link in this video so you can easily get to it. There, that should speed it up considerably. Okay, good. And let's see. Was there something else? No, that was it. See, there's something else I want to show you real quick. And this is a bug in Xcode, but you see how it's hard to tell which one I have selected, which file I have selected, because it turns white. That's not supposed to happen. And a way to fix that is, what I do is I hold down Command and I hit 0 twice to make it the project go away and come back. And you see this is the way it should look. So that's just a little tip on how to fix that. You just Command 0 0. All right, good. So we have it expanding outward correctly, right? Now when we click the button again, we want that circle to come back. So what we can do is, I'm not going to create a variable. I could create a variable like a Boolean variable and set it to true and false every time I click that button, but there's really no need to do that, because what I can do is I can just check this property right here, and I can check to see if there's an affine transform applied to it. I have to keep practicing that. Affine. Okay, so if I just say, I don't need self in this part right here. If the transform equals, and what I can do is, how do I know if there's a transform applied or not? It's easy. There's a constant that I can check here called identity, and it's kind of like it's hard to me. This isn't a really good word. Here, let me just fix that here. This isn't really a good word. Basically, what it means is that is the default transform. So if we haven't applied anything and you compare it with identity, it'll be true. To me, it should really just be like the default transform, which is nothing. So if transform equals identity, that means there's no transform applied to it. And if there's no transform applied, then that means it's in its starting position. So if we click it again, when it does have a transform on it, that means we want to animate it back to the circle. Actually, you know what I'm going to do, just to save time? I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to reverse this transform. And the way to reverse it is basically just set it back to identity. And what I can do is I could just hit dot identity like that. But I want to show you that identity comes from CGAffineTransform. So that's pretty much all it is right there. It's pretty simple. So let's test that. That's another thing that I like about transforms is that ability to reset it back to the way it was before. So I don't have to do another animation, and calculate its starting position. Okay, click it again, and it comes back. All right, great. So there's a couple more things that we have to do, of course, and that is we need to expand this menu so when I click it, it actually gets bigger. And also, we need to rotate that button. So let's work on raising this menu up. And that, of course, is going to be, let's see something first here. I'm going to deviate from the original program just to see how this looks. I'm curious now. What I did before is after the dark circle expanded out, then the next animation I did was to move it upward. But what if we moved it upward and expanded that dark circle at the same time? Let's see what that looks like. I might not like it, but we can switch it back. Okay, not that. We want the menu view. And we're going to do another transform on it. And remember, one of the other transforms that we saw was a transformation, or a translation rather. So the translation, just basically, you can manipulate the size. And there's one thing I wanted to explain something on this translation here. And that is, you see an X and Y coordinate. So you might automatically think, oh, I just put in the X and the Y where I want it to arrive. But it's not quite true. Basically, the way the translation works is it's relative from where your object starts. So if you want it to go up, you want to adjust the Y property, right? So we're not having it go side to side, so we're just going to leave it 0. But if you want it to go upwards, then you want to subtract a number. So that will move your object from its starting position. It'll subtract 100 from Y, and so it goes up. If you want something to go down, you make it a positive number, and it goes from where it's currently at, which is sort of like, think of it as like your Y is 0. This is your starting position, 0 and 0. So any numbers you add to this will move it from that starting position. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to move it a negative amount. Negative, what was it? Here, let's go back to our storyboard and take a look. This is basically our negative amount. Oh, let me show you something too. On storyboards, this took me a while to figure out. But if you want to adjust, you can actually adjust the constraints without going into your attributes inspector. And what you have to do is you just have to hover over the constraint first, and it takes like a second for it to highlight. And once it's highlighted, double click it. Don't try to double click it without it being highlighted first. So here we want to just move it 67, negative 67. Negative 67. And then basically to reset it, all we have to do is just set the identity to it. And that's its original starting position. There we go. You notice this animated a lot faster. Okay, so we click this. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad, right? Let's stick with this. Yeah, I like that. Okay, good. And okay, so the last thing that we have to do is we want to rotate that button, correct? So let's add that. Toggle menu button, and that has a transform, and we're going to use our last CGAffineTransform for this, and that is the rotation angle. All right, check this out. Now for the rotation, you think it'd be 180, correct? Because I want to move it 180 degrees, which is basically you're turning something around. Let's reset it. Okay, but take a look what happens here. when I click it, let's look at the rotation of where this this arrow goes. Doesn't quite make it all the way around, even though we set the angle to 180 degrees. Well, that's because it's a different measurement system. It's not actually degrees. This value represents radians. So we have to do a calculation in order to convert degrees to radians, because honestly, I can't tell you how many radians 180 degrees is off the top of my head. So I need a calculation. I need a function to do that for me. So I'll just call it, let's see. I'll just call this function radians. And I'm going to pass in a number, the degrees. There we go. And it's going to be a double. Oh, and it's going to return this property right here, rotation angle. That's actually a CGFloat, so that's what I want to return is a CGFloat. And for the parameter name, I called it degrees. And the reason why I put this underscore in here is so I don't have to put the parameter name in there when I call this function. This basically just allows me to not have to put in any parameter when I call the function. Okay, so we're going to return a CGFloat, and we're going to do a calculation inside of this. And basically what I'm going to do is take the degrees, multiply it by pi, right there, and then I'm going to divide that by the degrees again. And that's the formula. That's how you get a radian. So if we just come here, we'll say radians and pass in 180. Like that. So just to show you real quick, I have to call self. See, if I didn't have that underscore, then it'll require that I put in the parameter name when I call this. Like that, degrees 180. I don't care either way. It's kind of explicit. I mean, it's more clear when you do this, to show that it's expecting degrees. So we'll just leave it in there. All right, that's fine. And then we set it back. Okay, so let's test that. There we go. Beautiful. So already you can see the, that's another thing. I didn't notice this before. Look at the arrow, how it rotates. It's always going clockwise. I would have thought that if I set the identity, it would have gone counterclockwise to reset it. But I actually kind of like this. It looks kind of cool. Okay, so you saw with CGAffineTransform, you can do some really cool effects, really cool animations. And the thing that's really cool about using CGAffineTransforms is that you can to reset everything, you just set it back to identity. To reset the objects, their positions, or where they were before they were transformed, you just set it back to identity and you can animate that. So that makes it super handy. Okay, we get the menu working, going up and down. Now all we have to do is just add the buttons and make them fade in and out. And I'm going to speed up this next part because this tutorial really isn't about laying out objects or positioning them. I'm going to use a stack view to do this. So I'm going to speed up this next part. There's one tip. I'm going to slow it down to here just for a second. There's one tip I want to give you when working with stack views that will be a lifesaver for you. So a lot of times you want to select the stack view itself. And here, like I click around and okay, now I get the stack view, but an easy way to always select the stack view is you hold down Control and Shift and then you click on somewhere in that area and it will give you the kind of like a hierarchy of what you just clicked on. So here, the button is selected, but the button is inside a stack view. That stack view is inside the menu view, and that menu view is on top of a background, and that background is inside the root view, which is inside the view controller. So this is how I always select stack views. I hold down my Control and Shift, and I can always just click the stack view right there, and then change the properties for it. Okay, so all I did is I just gave the stack view some constraints. I set it to center and equal spacing because that spaces it out really nicely. And then the thing that's good about this too is if I change different size devices, these buttons will always stay nicely spaced apart. I don't have to set any constraints to manage their positions or anything like that. Okay, one other thing I want to point out too is this button also uses an interface builder designable with interface builder inspectable properties on it, which is what you see up here. So that's how I'm able to set like a corner radius and a border width and the border color. Right now the icon inside is black, but it will turn white because if you look at the images inside the assets cassettes, that's right, you probably guessed it, I set them all to template images. So knowing that they're set as template images, where's this going to get its color from? The tint property. And if we look at the tint color, it is set to orange. So that black, the color information in this icon, will be replaced with the tint color. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is just animate those buttons. And in order, or to, fade them in and out. And in order to do that, I need outlets for them. So I'm going to speed it up again while I add those outlets. Okay, good. Now what I want to do is when I first come in and load this view, I don't want any of those buttons to be visible. Let's just make some extra room here. I don't want these buttons to be visible. So I'm just going to set the alpha on all of them to 0. There we go. Now let's think about this. When do I want to show them? Well, I want to animate fading them in once the menu is showing. So it'll be in this next step right here. So what I can do is just I'll just call it toggle shared buttons. And let's create a function for that. Oops. Oh, I forgot the func keyword. Okay. So what I want this button to do, I forgot the self again. I always forget that self. Okay, so what I want to do is basically, I want to check, what the alpha is and make it the opposite, right? So I could do something like this: Facebook button dot alpha equals, and then I could say if Facebook button dot alpha, if it equals 0, then make it 1, else make it 0. And this is basically called a ternary operator. It's kind of like a mini if statement. So if alpha equals 0, so it basically reads like this: if alpha equals 0, then 1, else 0. And I could do that for each button, but I think it might be a little bit easier if I do this. And also the alpha, let me check that. Yeah, it's going to look for a CGFloat. It should be giving me a warning. I don't think it will let me do this. Nah, I guess it's fine. Okay, so basically we'll just create a property here, and I'll just call it alpha, I guess. And it'll equal this right here. And I'll just say alpha. Like that. Let's see, does that work? Yeah, it does want a CGFloat. I'm not going to put the CGFloat here because then I'll be repeating it 4 times for every button. Instead, I'll just go put the CGFloat up here. Yeah, so I just have to cast these numbers to a CGFloat, so it'll work. And then I'm just going to copy this. So we have Facebook button, Twitter, Google, and WhatsApp. Okay, that should work. And then when do we hide it? I'm thinking about like when you close the button. So if these things go back to normal, go back to where they were, then this isn't going to do anything, because by the time it gets to this point right here, after the animation is done, you can't even see them anymore, right? So I don't think we'll actually even need this completion handler. Let's just toggle the buttons right in here. Then you should be able to see them fade as the menu starts to go down, which is what we want. Whoops. Oh, not toggle menu button. We want to toggle shared buttons. There we go. Okay, it looks awesome. But you notice there's one animation I actually forgot to do. And that's when these buttons appear, they just snap into place. They didn't fade into place. And that's because I forgot to put a animation behind here. So I can do that. And we just need the simplest one. And we can fade it out over, I guess, let's try 0.5 seconds. And let's take this, and we're going to put it in here. There. Now, from chain animations, what I was talking about before was extracting this out into a function so you can call it in different places or switch it around. But since this animation right here only happens in one place, I'm just going to leave it where it is. And I shouldn't have to change it, so you can extract it into a different function if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. There we go, faded right in. That's perfect. So there you go. I taught you how to build a menu and using 3 different types of transforms, affine transforms. So I hope you have a better understanding of what this core graphics affine transform is, how you can scale things, translate them by moving their position and rotating objects, and why it's so easy to do with animations, because once you move something or transform something one way, you can just undo it easily by setting it back to its identity, by setting the transform property back to our CGAffineTransform identity. All right, great. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you learned something that you want to share with your friends, click the share button. That really helps me out. And so consider subscribing, because I think I have maybe 2 more videos on animation that I want to show you guys. All right, thank you very much, and have a good night.